Ooh, this is exotic. Muscle Cat Media. Nice. Cultural.
It is another week of baseball expats, and as promised, kind of as promised, I guess. We were going to do a recap episode because Andrew Reynolds, Rolsey, he is in Chinese Taipei in Taiwan and Tainan, trying to call the Women's World Cup, Group B or Group Tainan, whatever you want to call it. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of rain. So as of recording, there is yet to be a game played. So this is turning into a preview episode, and we brought in a very special guest to do that. But first, before we bring her in, let's throw it over to you, Rolsey. What's up, man? You wet or what?
Now, I'm perfectly dry. I haven't ventured outside, nor will I, while it's still raining as much as it has. It's funny because we've been talking about the rain, obviously, because it's the only thing that we've had to talk about. I'd love to be calling baseball, as you mentioned, but you know that the forecast is a proverbial four-letter word when they're giving you the forecast in centimeters and not millimeters, and that's what we've been dealing with basically for the last 3 days, right? Chris Day, who's one of the main liaisons for the Chinese Taipei Baseball Association, who subsequently bought Amy and I an ice cream from Macca's the other day. We can talk about that. But he's basically said that he's never seen rain like this that's not either a typhoon or part of monsoon season. And it's neither at the moment. It just happens to be that the southern end of the country is getting bad. And there's nothing we can do about it. Like it's been a state of emergency in Tainan for the last 2 days. We had a similar scenario last year for the U12s. They were able to play behind closed doors last year because there was enough of, I guess, a gap of the rain where they were able to play, but we just haven't had that yet. So we wait and hope. That's all we can do.
Well, to join us is the other half of the commentary team over there. Good friend of ours, good friend of Australian baseball, 6-time Emerald, has played in a bunch of these tournaments that you guys are calling in the WBSC Women's World Cup. Even has a couple medals to show for it too, including a silver for Australia. It is an Australian baseball legend and making her WBSC, not her commentary debut, but her WBSC commentary debut. Amy McCann joining us to help, I guess not recap, but preview the show. Recap the rain, preview the show. Amy, I know this experience probably hasn't been as expected for you. There's nothing you can do to control the weather. You've been in baseball long enough to know that this happens. But man, have you seen any rain like this before?
My life. I just can't get over the fact it just won't stop raining in the scale that it's raining. And I think when the topic of conversation at breakfast this morning was the shades of the different grey, and we were very excited this morning because it was the lighter shade of grey when I opened up the window and I could actually see a few more blocks. I was like, yes. Now it's a little bit darker again, but no, thanks for having me. I think it's perfect. You guys commentated with both of you. I'm very excited, very nervous, but I just want to get out there. And look, I've been in this situation myself, very blessed to have had a very unrain affected World Cup career. So I just think about all the players out there, just watching the teams go through their training sessions yesterday. We saw players in car parks. The Japanese used the bottom of their hotel car park. We've seen, just an array of the Venezuelans were in the foyers and the hallways of the hotel. Yeah, you got to control the controllables, and that's all you can do in baseball.
So there's 6 teams in this group, and they are fighting to join 3 other teams who've already qualified in Rockford. We talked about that on the podcast a few weeks ago, watched it very closely. Obviously, we're all Australian, so we're quite biased in terms of, I think, where we wanted to go. Well, I am, you are, Amy. Rolsey, he'll say he's not, but he definitely is. He's all Team Australia. The Emeralds did get through with the USA and Canada. They're through to the next round. Now it's between the Philippines, Japan, Cuba, Chinese Taipei, Great Britain, and Venezuela. 3 of those teams will emerge. They all play each other once. Top 3 go through. We won't even get into the potential tiebreakers. We were hoping to at this point, based on, who's played who, what are the key games going up. No one has thrown a pitch yet. So I'm going to ask you both some questions. You guys have been talking to the team, studying the team, seeing what's going on there. So I'm curious to learn some more information from the 2 experts in the game. But you did mention the rain. So what, Amy, does this do right now? Like if you're a pitcher and you were supposed to go game 1 of this tournament, And now the schedule is on the WBSC website, but that is even fluid. That thing changes based on what games get in or out, and the tournament organizers are working hard. So if you are a starting pitcher or a manager, how does this change things, and what can you even do to prepare and plan your staff now?
I think, first of all, shout out to the WBSC organisers. They're doing an amazing job. They've got multiple schedules, and it's a tough job for them. Whatever their schedule is, the teams are going to run hard at it. And I think what this does now, it completely changes the tournament. It completely changes the tactics. What you'll find now is we are very likely going to have double headers. We may have a triple header situation. It's unheard of. And what that does is, because of the uncertainty with the rain, basically every single game now is like a gold medal game. And you have to start, in my opinion, you have to go with your aces. And even if, like, we see at the moment, we know the starters for today's game, and we see the lineup for what Japan's throwing against the Philippines, and they're doing just that. I think they're going, you know what, we may only get one game, and if we get a couple or three, we have to make sure that we go out 1, 2, 3 aces, because every single win right now is absolutely vital. So it's like a finals, like in a little nutshell.
Rolsey, this is interesting because you and I literally, if you were to read our text message change or listen to our conversation, we love to talk about tournament baseball and what pitching matchups you are going to have. So this is a good example, Japan versus Philippines, because with all due respect for Philippines, you know, they are not the favorite versus Japan. Japan is the heavy favorite in this group in general. Normally, if you're Risa Nakashima and the manager of Japan, you probably wouldn't throw your ace versus the Philippines. You want to save her for one of the games that you think is a likelihood of being beat. You're going to throw one of your depth players. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way at Philippines at all. You're, as a coach, you kind of rank the teams and you pick the games you go at. So, Rolsey, would you do exactly what Amy says and all of a sudden change your strategy and be like, I actually think I now need to throw my best versus a team that we probably should beat without our best?
Yeah, look, I think you have to. I mean, the chatter around here is, and again, nothing's official. We probably need to, we might have to have that caveat about 7 times on the show, is to say that nothing's official. We're doing a lot of speculating. But, I mean, essentially, they could play 3 games each and call it an official tournament, right? Which means that not everybody gets to play everybody. It's unfair, but it may just kind of be luck of the draw on who you actually end up playing. And again, we have the schedule for today. We don't know if that will carry over to tomorrow, if there's no baseball or what have you. But I guess it's just as interesting for those new nations like the Philippines and Great Britain, right? Because, I mean, coming into this tournament, you thought, Amy and I have talked a lot about this offline, saying one of those teams, in essence, was going to get their first World Cup win ever this weekend. And who knows if those teams are either going to end up playing each other, right? So if you were the Philippines, you were maybe saving your best arm for Great Britain, thinking that was your best chance to get your country's first World Cup victory. But you're right, it may end up being that now Philippines has to throw their best against a Venezuela or against a Chinese Taipei or against a Japan, because they may not necessarily know if that matchup with Great Britain is ever even going to come to be, right? So I think everything is fluid at the moment. But from a planning standpoint for these managers, not knowing what the schedule might look like tomorrow or the next day, I think that's probably what you have to plan for, is to say, look, if we're only going to play 3 games, we've got to throw our best 3 arms against whatever team is in front of us, right? It's kind of hard to play matchups at this point because, you know, if you lose a game in a 3-game tournament, your trip to Rockford next year may be in jeopardy.
Wow. That complicates things immensely for all these managers. So you're right, Amy. You just have to go out, and you're trying to win every game you play anyways. But yeah, that takes away that kind of, not cheeky's the wrong word, but that sort of deliberate, I'm going to match our ace up against there. You think back to the Rockford group where Mexico and Australia were playing each other, and it didn't matter where they were going to match up in the group stage. They played each other first, but it could have been 5th. You were going to have Team Australia, the Emeralds, they were going to throw their ace, or, well, they were going to piggyback anyways, but they threw their 2 most experienced pitchers versus Mexico quite intentfully, and Mexico threw their best pitcher versus Australia. And that was all very intentional because they thought at the start of the tournament it was a game between those 2 teams to see who would advance. Things don't always work out like that, but that was the planning for both of them. So that's just out the window.
It is. And I think we have to remember as well, the strategy going into the qualified pools is completely different to the finals, because obviously There's no setting up a roster and setting up a starter at the start of the week so you have them for the finals at the end. It is literally go all out, particularly for teams. But as you said, strategize against a team. I like to look at it. You're looking at the team that you think could bump you out of third place. Obviously, Japan, look, they've in my opinion, obviously the clear favourite here. But if you're the Venezuela, Cuba and Chinese Taipei, you're looking at each other and you're basically trying to work out now, okay, which one do I have to target? And it's a fascinating, this way of playing was never in my existence. We all played together every 2 years. We didn't have the separated two-year pools. So it's a totally different ball game, literally. So, yeah, excited to see I'm excited to see it getting played out literally on a field sometime in the next few days.
Well, in women's baseball over the last decade or so, respectfully, it has been Japan and the rest. Japan are on a historic run right now in terms of winning gold medals. So we'll say Japan and the rest again for this group. So let's get Japan out of the way first. No, it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to say that Japan are the favorites in this group. It's baseball. Anything can happen. I get that. But Japan's roster was interesting to me when it came out because there's not a whole lot of turnover from the squad that won a gold medal just a few years ago. Obviously, there's some carryover players. So can you two walk me through what you see as the thinking behind Japan's roster construction and where they're sort of at as a baseball nation in the women's game right now?
Yeah, look, as you said, 7-time defending champions. They did have their winning streak broken by the USA in the finals last year, but they had 12 years of undefeated baseball. And I think what's fascinating about this team is they sent effectively a development team to the Asian Cup last year, 9 months ago, and only one player who won the Triple Crown at that event is on this roster. They now have 6 players from that gold medal final 2 years ago here. It's a big change, and they're a young side. All of the players are in their 20s. I think there's one 31-year-old. Like, they're a young side, and I'm excited. They've got some veterans, and I think with Japan, as we talk about the conveyor belt of players, I mean, they've got 70 or 80 high school teams now playing girls baseball and women's baseball. So they have the depth. I know they as a nation are worried. We all saw the USA, how strong they were. We know there's other countries rising, and there were some closer games. I think we've seen some closer games over the last couple of World Cup and qualifiers for Japan. But if I know Japan, they're going to come out and they are going to be looking clinical. But I'm excited. I'm excited to see, those 14 players. There's some returning players that are back in the side after 8-10 years out. So there's experience coming in with a blend of rookies, and I think it's exciting. And as I said, they had an under-21 team at the Asian Cup 9 months ago, and they went through undefeated. So they've got the cattle.
Rolsey, when you were looking and writing the lineup yesterday for the games that never happened, were there a couple of players on Japan that were in that lineup or on the pitching staff that really kind of jumped out to you?
Well, we never really got to that point. I think the telling thing for me was Rissa at the press conference the day before play was supposed to start. So on Saturday night, and I mean, all Japanese managers are typically the same in the way that they speak, even though that, they obviously come in large favorites, and it would be a monumental upset if they didn't advance through to Rockford next year. But I would describe her, and Amy may agree or disagree with me on this, but I would describe her as pretty cautiously optimistic on Saturday, because this is a brand new team, and Japan have not really been in this spot before, right? Because they had so many of their big names retire or are playing in the WPBL. And she said, look, our only goal here is to punch our ticket. It wasn't our only goal here is to go out and be dominant. It was our goal is to punch our ticket. And Rissa basically said as much. Like, she said, I just want this team to gel, which for me was pretty telling. And I mean, maybe obvious coming from her as well. But the fact that that was kind of the first thing on her mind is it's like she knows that she has a team that's very different to the teams that have won World Cups in the past. So for the first thing out of her mouth at a press conference like that to be like, my biggest thing is seeing how this team can gel. And Amy and I have spoken about this with this team is they may not be the offensive and pitching juggernaut that they have been in the past. Maybe at least not this week. Potentially they could be 12 months from now. But this is a team that we think is largely going to have to win games on defense. which is a strength that this team has had for a decade and a half. So, yes, Japan has been dominant. Yes, we expect them to get through, but I do think we maybe could see some things from a Japanese team that maybe we haven't seen in the last half decade or decade. Amy, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but that's kind of the thing that I'm the most interested in seeing with Japan.
Yeah, do you know what? It's funny. I've been talking to Hiroko Yamada, the chair of the WBSC Women's Foundation. She's been she's the queen of Japanese women's baseball. And talking to Rissa, and without divulging conversations, I'll put it this way. Japan, it's not that they're worried, and they're 7-time defending world champions and they've lost one game in 12 years. But they can see that the rest of the world is starting to rise. And I think a 7-time defending champion that can see the rest of the world starting to rise and they know they need to rise, that's scary. It's a scary prospect. So I agree. I think we're going to see different things. I think, again, they're all here to punch a ticket and it gives them some flexibility. But, yeah, I think I'm really scared about them suddenly going, we need to kick into gear and we've only lost one game in 12 years. Yeah. That's cool.
Was there any player for you, Amy, that maybe I should keep my eye on? You always seem to give me a star from the women's game before they become stars.
Look, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm a baseball fan at heart. I think I'd probably miss my own wedding to watch women's baseball, but I cannot go past Shira Ishii. She is the reigning MVP, and you're going to go obvious pick, Amy. She's an outfielder, first ever outfielder, pure positional player to win an MVP, and I just cannot wait to see her, how she goes. And I just think, look, for me, Mika Tai, she's a lefty, and Claire O'Sullivan said she cannot wait to see her come roll out, and she's got some junk. Yeah, look, they're the ones. I think Hannah Booster and Onodera as well. Really excited to see Onodera back. But yeah, I think we're going to be writing down some new names after this week for Japan.
Big shout out to
Leave
all
it to the all-world
that
outfielder to select an outfielder as her player of the tournament.
Classic.
Predictable play, predictable.
I do love me an outfielder.
I would be remiss to not have the homer in me and mention the Aussie Lynx on the Japanese national team. Rissa Nakashima is basically Australian. We'll claim her. She's even coached at the AWC before. She's played in Australia before. She's coached at the Women's Showcase. Shea Lillywhite, one of the legends of baseball in general, but particularly Australian baseball. She's actually the team's physical therapist. And a cool little link is Sawa Kashizaki has played. Have you played against her, Amy?
Good chance I have. I know Kei Matsumoto, who is actually one of the assistants on the team as well. She played in the first World Cup against me, and she's played a state with me for Victoria and won a national title. So there are a lot of Aussie links on this team.
Yeah, Sawa Kashizaki, I'm pretty sure, played for Springvale for a year or two. So there's probably a chance that you have played against her, and we'll see how she was over when she was a bit younger. So I'd be very curious to see those links. You'll have to catch up there. But we'll move on from Japan because I feel like we'll be talking about Japanese baseball for a while. And we're going to go to the other end of things, and it's Japan's scheduled first game. And that's the Philippines. And it's a very interesting team. I know, from chatting with Amy, and I've really only been, immersed in the women's baseball world over the last 4 years, basically, Amy, since we've became friends and called some games together. I can net some players on some of the other countries and kind of know their philosophies. I'm going to be honest. I could not tell you much about anything about Philippines women's baseball. I couldn't tell you anything about Philippines baseball in general. And my life is international baseball now in the men's and women's game. So both of you, we'll start with Amy, then we'll move to Rolsey. Can you teach me something about Philippines baseball?
We're all learning about the Philippines baseball. What I'll say is this has been a long time coming. They actually qualified for the 2020 World Cup. They got bronze at the Asian Cup, in 2019. And then remember that thing called COVID? That hit and wiped it out, unfortunately. And then obviously that all got wiped out. And then they didn't qualify out of the 2023 Asian Championships. So they only started, their program is about 10 years old. It was a very, very deliberate attempt by the Philippines Baseball Association to establish a women's program. And they had no no shame in basically raiding softball. And the team that is still around, but the team that was put together was a very, very, very strong softball, I guess, heritage, and there's still some existing players, so they can play. They are tidy, obviously not as tidy as a Japan and a Chinese Taipei, but I think the backing of the federation in the Philippines is a huge thing, and I'm excited. They've got some stories out of there.
Yeah, and you mentioned them qualifying, obviously, for COVID, not able to play in that tournament. It was like a seventh inning collapse against Hong Kong, China in 2023 that kept them from the last qualifying spot in Asia to actually get into the 2024. So they've been on the cusp for a while, right? So this is a long time coming for the Philippines. And to that point of softball, I mean, this is a nation that's top 15 in the world in women's softball. So it's clear that they've identified loads of talent in that sport. And they're not the only nation that's starting to raid softball for women's baseball. I mean, we're seeing it quite a bit, especially for some of the smaller nations. Some of the Latin American countries are still doing it. I know Amy and I are keen to talk about and see Venezuela, which we'll speak about here in just a bit. But the other thing for the Philippines is they're a team that's just kind of been put together, not on a whim. Like, obviously, they've identified the best players, and most of them do come from softball backgrounds. But as we're seeing the rain tumble down here, the Philippines have essentially had no lead up. I mean, Amy and I were talking about it at the press conference the other day. I don't think I've ever heard a manager say, Amy, what were his exact words? It was probably lost in translation a little bit, but it was basically, we're not as prepared as we'd like to be. And that was because of the weather that they've had in the Philippines, right? They just haven't had the ability to train much as a team. And I think probably what he was trying to say is we would love to have had more time together to prepare. But I think the fact that they do have so much talent that they have rated from softball, and when you consider that they're the number 13 team in the world in women's softball, we know there's going to be some talent on that team. It's just, whether or not that translates over. Are they the type of team which we see oftentimes in tournaments like this that get better as the tournament goes on? Unfortunately, they're not really going to have that opportunity in a shorter tournament where, as opposed to a 10-day tournament where a team's much better on day 8 than they are on day 1. How much better can you be on day 3 than day 1 in a shortened tournament like this? I guess is yet to be seen. But yeah, they're one of the teams that I'm intrigued to see, again, because it has been such a long time coming for them to get into one of these competitions.
Amy, I know you are a proud baseballer, so but I know you've played with a lot of players that have been very, very high-level softball players and very high-level baseball players. But you've also played with some players that have maybe been a high-level baseball player, tried softball, didn't quite connect, and vice versa. Very high-level softball player came over to women's baseball and thought, hey, this will be easy, and then it wasn't. So obviously the rules are pretty much the same. I mean, the dimensions are a little different. The big difference is that ball, the pitch angle, all that. But when you are, as a player, transitioning from softball to baseball, what is that biggest challenge or things to look for, I suppose, when you're making that transition?
I think, as you said, I'm a pure baseball, and I tip my cap to everyone that came across, your Chelsea Falcons, your Lee Godfreys, people like that. I think the number one thing is you've got time. You've got more time, particularly in the infield. And I'm a big promoter of, I think a lot of baseballers should go and play softball, particularly in the infield, because it will clean up your glove work, your arm. You need to be quicker. I think that's probably the main thing you'll see I think the Philippines they'll have a solid infield. They will be clinical. I think that will be the thing that will stand out. Obviously, there's a big difference in the pitching, and then just the hitting. You'll find there'll be a lot more bat to ball skills. You'll find that they should have quicker bat speed, things like that. And then we just see how it plays out really with how they then face the movement that we see, particularly from a Japanese team, the strength in that deliberate fastball from those South American teams. So it'd be interesting to see. And they've got some decent players: Helga Campos, Jojo Lim, Erica Fernandez. There's some quality leaders on that team for such a young team.
I like it. So they'll have an opportunity. You're right, that bat speed, you got to be quick to the ball because that mound is so much closer that even though the velocity is not the same as baseball, your reaction time is actually less, believe it or not, in softball than it is baseball just because of the distance. But the movement, you're right, Amy, that is the hard part. Small ball, little white thing coming out of hand from a funky angle, harder to hit. But so there's the strengths and weaknesses. That's a good breakdown of it. And on the theme of softball, let's transition to another team here. And I want to talk about Great Britain because their captain is actually a proud South Australian, but has been in Britain for a long time. Judo there. But she was at Seacombe Softball Club. So shout out to the Seacombe Tigers. I'm quite involved with South Australian softball. So I know people in the SA community are pretty pumped to watch Laura Briggs, or Danny Briggs, sorry. Danny Briggs play, because she is obviously a leader. She's a veteran, and she's been in the UK for a while. But what about Great Britain? I know you've talked to them on your podcast. Shout out to Women's Baseball Inside Pitch when you covered the European Women's Championship last year. So what was kind of your read on what Great Britain baseball is at right now?
I think the number one thing we saw, Andrew, when we were there, we saw them at training the other day. They're excited, but I think they're realistic. They get it. They are just number one, so excited to have won through. We saw them beat the Czech Republic in the Euros last year. And their team is a very big blend of skills. There's some raw talent in there. Daria Malone, she's from the British Virgin Islands, and she has got some talent with the bat, with the ball. Beth Caston's one of the best. I was watching her in the outfield yesterday. Well, the outfield in the indoor facility, I should say, brilliant indoor facility. But they're a real mixture. I mean, British baseball, women's baseball UK started by Amanda Hocking only about 8 years ago. And now there's teams all across the country. And I think what they're doing is great. They're obviously behind. They're a few decades behind every other nation. But I think my comment around Great Britain and Philippines is we heard them say in the press conference the other day, and I thought it was quite striking, is we need everyone to look beyond the box scores for some of these games at this event. We need to understand where the game is going, and we will probably see an African team, I would imagine, come into the WBSC family soon. And we have to understand to look past the box scores. And I think there's things that they'll be targeting the Philippines. They also have strategies against Japan, Great Britain, and I think that's really exciting. They're just excited to see where they are against the rest of the world. And I'm excited to see them here.
What do you think, Rolsey?
Yeah, look, I think there's so many good stories on this Great Britain team for mine. Like I want to say, I've got it. Computer's acting up a bit here, but there's representatives from 7 or 8 different nationalities on this GB team. So it's largely a lot of individuals that have come from a lot of different backgrounds. I mean, obviously they're all eligible to play for Great Britain, but I mean, you talk about Danny Briggs, like she's a great story, was injured for the Euros, right? And is going to come back at 42 years of age to play in a World Cup. Della Paz, who Amy and I kept a good eye on the other day, she's 42 years of age as well. She looks like she's about 26. But she has a Filipino background, so obviously she would be very keen to play against the Philippines. I mean, Laura Harai, who we also saw
mother of 3,
he was drafted in the WPBL, but ended up not playing. Kath Armstrong was one that just had a baby 7 months ago. She missed the Euros.
Wow.
And is here at this tournament with little Freddie, who they said we'll see on the broadcast several times, I'm sure. 7-month-old little Freddie, who's got his Team GB get up ready to go. So there's so many cool stories on this Team GB side. And as Amy said, they really do just seem proud to be here to represent. But realistically, they do feel like they're here to represent themselves, right? They feel like they're here to get a victory. And that's kind of the main sentiment that we found when we chatted with him at training the other day.
Never underestimate mom strength is what I learned in the Rockford group. You saw that with a couple of the Aussies, Jess Johnson in particular, like shoved versus the USA. That was so cool. So you know, the women who are getting a little bit older in age, younger at heart, but newer in mom life. They showed out at Rockford. So maybe it'll be the same here. Let's move on to Venezuela, though. They are always a threat. They have been sort of around that top 3 to 5 to 6 sort of range in tournaments in the past. And even when they have not won medals, they have often had some heartbreaking losses, perhaps in semifinals, perhaps to Australian teams even in the past. But they've always been really around the mark. And I know, Amy, that as a player, I know from what you've told me, every time you go there, you're sort of circling Venezuela, being like, that's a team as Australia that we need to beat, because if we're going to medal, we're going to have to get through them at some point. Is it the same sort of standard for Venezuela in 2026 as it has been the last 16 years?
Oh, I'm telling you now, like as I've said, I'm the biggest fan of women's baseball. And I tell you, Andrew can probably tell you how excited I was to watch Venezuela train. I just wanted popcorn. I wouldn't leave. Andrew wanted to go. It was raining. And I'm like, I want to stay. That was as exciting and as intense and as fun and as clean a training session I've seen outside of the Japanese team. I'm telling you, I think they have come to play. And I saw them at the first World Cup. They played in Venezuela, went on a tear. We got them in the semi-finals when they were undefeated. And they finished sixth in the top six times. They obviously won that medal. They won a bronze medal 10 years ago. But I think that we're going to see, I think there's a change at the helm. We have Cindy Anzola, head coach now. She was back in 2010. She has been around this team for 16 years. She's put the girls as soon as she took the head job a year ago, all of the girls went into a strength and conditioning program, individually personalised. They have some youth coming out that I am so excited. They're Gabriela Garcia, Duran. We know Frandelis Garcia is the face of Venezuelan baseball. I tell you now, I think they are going to be the next country that wins a World Cup outside of the USA and Japan. And I really hope we need it for the legitimacy of our sport. But, oh, my God, they are exciting. I cannot wait to see them on the field.
That is a huge call. And Amy, you get excited about things. So I'm going to go and double check this with Rolsey here. Rolsey, Amy McCann just said that Venezuela might be the best shot to win a World Cup outside of the USA and Japan. Is this fact or is this fiction?
Look, I trust Amy's very well-trained eye a lot better than mine. But from what I saw right next to Amy the other day, it's hard to disagree. And it's not just – it's a mixture of things, right? And Amy and I obviously view the game from very different lenses, as we should, right? Amy's a former player, an all-world player. She's medaled in World Cups. And she's played in 6 of them. I've never done 6 things, or I've never done one thing 6 times in my life, right? So we view the game from a very different lens. But for me, what was so impressive about Venezuela was the way that from the time you get an hour and a half to train, right? They were done within an hour. But the intent at which they went about their work, and every player knew to the millimeter, to the second, where they needed to be and what they needed to be doing. But it wasn't only that they were so well drilled. It's because of this mix of experience and youth. It's not like we were watching a bunch of 26, 27, 28-year-old players. Like there were 2 17-year-olds that Amy and I naturally gravitated to because of athleticism. Garcia, who she just spoke about, and Marilyn Yendez was the other, who did not miss a barrel in soft toss and off a pitching machine in probably the 30 swings that we saw her take. And she's 17 years of age, right? The ball just sounded different coming off her bat. Whether that translates into a game, we'd love to know, right? Yeah. But I don't know what we expected necessarily before they came in. It's always hard to remember what your expectations were once you've seen what the product is. But I know that our expectation, it wasn't what we ended up seeing out of Venezuela. And there were a lot of people from the WBSC, from the organizing committee. You know, Chris Day, who I spoke about just before from the CTDA, sort of came over at me and he said, this feels different. Like, it feels like this team is here to do something. And they were very businesslike, but it wasn't as though they weren't enjoying what they were doing. And in true Latin American fashion, they were businesslike, but they were very jovial about it, right? I think we left that day with a very different opinion on what Venezuela is and what they could be. So it's hard for me to argue with Amy's assessment that they could be the next team to win a World Cup outside of the USA and Japan.
Well, they did it in the men's, right? They won the World Baseball Classic, and you'd got to think that has a flow-on effect to all levels of the program, right? Like, you want to establish yourself as the dominant baseball nation. Japan has won men's, they've won women's. Venezuela have that opportunity now, right, Rolsey?
Yes, and I guess the thing that we failed to mention, and Amy keeps harping on this, and I think she's right about it, is women's baseball needs a Latin American powerhouse. It needs it desperately. It needs a third team to compete against Japan and the USA. But if that team was Canada or Korea or Chinese Taipei, it would still maybe feel a little bit regional. But women's baseball really needs one of these Latin American countries to step up. And I do think the momentum off of a World Baseball Classic and, the rocket ship that Venezuelan men's baseball has been on the last half decade If the women's program can follow that, it's only good. Competition is nearly always good for any industry, sport or otherwise. So if they are that Latin American country that steps up and becomes that next powerhouse, it's only good for everybody. And that may be part of the reason why Rissa was so sheepish at her press conference, is she's not only seeing how good the United States looked in Rockford, but maybe she knew something that we didn't know until watching training, that there was a Venezuelan team that was sort of coming for blood.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, we go back to Cindy and Zola, one of the things that stood out to me as well yesterday, and also I think we've seen with the USA, the change in their coaching staff, I think the managerial side as well is starting to see a bit of a shift around the world. Like, one of the things that stood out to me was Cindy Anzola. She had a coach at every station and they were running things to the minute. And it was just, she was walking around just managing her staff. And it was just brilliant the way that I just saw her just looking after her entire family. And the coaches, we had the coaches bringing us water. They were amazing. We felt part of the family. But yeah, I just want to also want to say, like, that's to me not saying, look, I don't think the Emeralds can win a World Cup. I don't think Chinese Taipei can win a World Cup. That is not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
As Andrew said, there is something different about this team. And I think the youth, as we said, with Duran, Garcia, Yendez coming through, they've got 11 players returning from 2 years ago. There is just an aura about this team that I haven't seen in my time. And it excites me. It really does.
Optically, it would look pretty cool for the WBSC if you have some different regions that do get through. You're right, because we've got 2 North American teams from Rockford. We've got one from Oceania in Australia that's already through. You're assuming Japan's going to get through. That would be Asia. Venezuela, if they can get through, then you'd have South America. Maybe there can be one of the other teams, we're about to talk about them, get through as well. But that would be cool if in your final 6, you had at least 4 different continents represented. But let's go to another Latin American team, maybe more of a Caribbean team, you want to call it, sort of situated between Latin America. They speak Spanish, but I'm really curious to know what Cuban women's baseball is like. We know the men are, they're always Australia's boogie bear, but the men have a reputation of beyond belief there. Is it the same in the women's game for Cuban baseball or not quite?
I think for me, when Cuba first turned up, I played the first Cuban team back in Taiwan 20 years ago. And they turned up and they pretty much had 9 gloves. The first base was using a Buffalo Sports glove that looked like it was from 1973. They had basically 1 bat. And we were like, okay, wow. And they were sharp, they were loud, they were strong. And we were like, okay. And we ended up only beating them in a walk-off with a pinch hit with a pitcher running at second base in the bottom of the 7th with 2 outs. So we beat them by 1 run. And that was the moment I kind of went, okay, South America coming, is Cuba coming? And I'm not going to say I've been disappointed with them, but I think in the 2 decades they haven't come on. We've only seen them just hover around that 6 to 8. They've failed to qualify for the last World Cup, and they've got some bloody good players. Like, it's just, for me, I think it's whoever decides, and I think Venezuela is the one that's gone, we're in. If Cuba decided to go, we're in too, I think we could see that. We haven't seen it in the last 2 decades. They do have a very, very young team here. They've got 5 teenagers. They've got 3 16-year-olds. Chacon, who is scheduled to start the first game, is a 16-year-old. And I'm frothing at seeing her start. I think maybe there might be a bit of a generational change in this team now, and maybe that might be the spark that they need. And, hey, if your neighbour next door or near enough neighbour in Venezuela starts stepping up, maybe that's going to be a thing that we see in South America.
They're a very young team too, right? It seems like a deliberate type of rebuild for Cuba. I mean, the average age, I think I calculated, I mean, they're by far and away the youngest team on average here. I think just over 23 years of age. Their oldest player is 33. Compare that to some of the other sides that have got, some into their 40s and other into their late 30s. But they're also incredibly regional, which sort of, I think, speaks to kind of what the women's baseball program looks like in Cuba. I mean, for such a prolific baseball playing nation, the women's pathway is quite narrow. And the majority of these players all come from a single region. I mean, the captain is the only one that's from Havana, Jessica Herrera, who's one of only 4 or 5 returners on this team. So the way that the roster is constructed tells me that it's probably not the best talent that Cuba could put together from the women's game. I'm sure they probably could put together a better team, but there does seem to be a deliberate measure to get the younger players coming through. I think they've got 4 or 5 players that were born after 2009 on this team, right? So there is a clear intent to get a lot of young players in, get them a lot of experience. And obviously they would hope to qualify and get to Rockford. But it does really feel like with Cuba, the intent is growing this from the ground up and kind of not starting over, but rebuilding with a young core and hoping that, you see the fruits of that labor down the track.
Let's jump to the final team in this group. It's the host, Chinese Taipei. Now, a little bit of history for Chinese Taipei is they were, first off, they're the 5th or 6th ranked team in the world, so they're right around the mark. But they were building and building and building. They were sort of pesky in your era, Amy. Then you leave the team and they get to a bronze medal game, Chinese Taipei. I think they won silver in the United States just before COVID. COVID happens. Last time around, they did get through to the, I don't know if you call it the super round or the final round, whatever it is. They qualified for that final round. They were in the final 6. They finished 6th out of that group. I think they won 4 games out of the 10 that they played overall last year. So they're a competitive team, right? They can go there. So our Chinese Taipei, have you seen any indication that they have taken a step forward from, they were on the outside looking in, then they were firmly in the group. Are they in contender territory yet, or are there still some work to go?
Look, it's hard when you look at them on paper. Half their rosters played like 3 World Cups or more. They've got a handful of girls that have played 5, 6, 7 World Cups. It's crazy. But they're also a big returning group from a team that went 0-5 2 years ago. And they were my team when we played in the super round. In 2024, they went 0-5. And for me, they were the biggest disappointment for me because I've looked at them for the last 2 decades. The first time, they've been in every World Cup. We beat them in 2004, 2006. We got them, I remember, in a night game 4-0. It was like, and I was like, oh, they're here. They're coming. And they haven't quite come. As you said, they won that bronze medal in 2018. But I think maybe it's a blessing and a curse. They've kept a big core of people and they keep this group. But maybe it's going to be very interesting to see, to go 0-5, bring a big group back, their experience. You've got a home final, a home World Cup qualifier. I want to see the youth. They are the oldest team, average age, and I'm not seeing the youth coming through Chinese Taipei. And I think, given their performances over the last few World Cups, I need to see some youth. So we'll see. Who knows? Home final. They've got plenty of stars, and yeah, very interesting to see where they go after this World Cup.
Rolsey, is this sort of then, from a narrative perspective, the last chance for the current or old guard, if you want to put it that way?
Well, that's sort of exactly what I was going to say. I mean, we talked about Cuba's youth just a moment ago. For comparison, the average age of this team is 29. So that speaks exactly to what Amy's saying, is where is the youth coming through? A lot of them have moved to softball or are continuing to play softball, as we've been having conversations here with people in Taiwan, and there's just not that youth group to pull from at the moment because the pathway for women's baseball is a little bit muddy in Taiwan, despite how popular, obviously, baseball has become, particularly off the back of Chinese Taipei's Premier 12 win a couple years ago. But I mean, look, not to age Amy, but there are 3 players on this team that she played against at one point or another in World Cup.
Really?
So it just goes to show, that there's just not that youth coming through, or if there is, they're simply just not ready for the international stage. And I guess the other thing we have to keep in mind is that Chinese Taipei was not originally meant to host this tournament. So you wonder, if this wasn't being held in Taiwan, would Chinese Taipei potentially have taken a different route? Are there some younger players coming through that maybe they would have taken a chance on if it was a tournament not held, at home for them? Whereas, I mean, we know, obviously, the Taiwanese people are an incredibly proud group of people, and they would want to put a team that they feels like is the best chance of advancing in a home tournament. If this tournament was somewhere else, maybe they go, look, now is the time for us to turn over the new guard. But maybe all the stars have aligned, sort of as you mentioned there, Eric, to say, well, why don't we give it one last shot with all of these veteran players? Because maybe even if they do qualify, potentially the World Cup at a country away is the time to blood some of those new players. So they're a really interesting test case because they do have so many veterans who have had patchy history in World Cup competitions, but they're just going to go around with them one more time and see what happens.
Yeah, and for me saying I want youth, I don't want age. The baseball diamond doesn't know how old you are, and it's not about age. It's just about that new generation. And I think we've got some people I played against, Yu Ying Shui, Yu Xuan Chu. They're some of the best players we've ever seen. Like, they are fantastic, and I'm really keen to see how they go. But they do have a couple of youth. I think Xing Huang, actually, fun fact, was the first Chinese Taipei player to play at the Koshin girls tournament.
Wow.
And she's yeah. So she's yeah. And Zhizhen Cheng as well. So she's only 19. So there's a couple there I've got my eye on. But I look, as I said, the baseball diamond doesn't know how old you are, and I really hope that all of these veterans come out and put on a show and show why they've played 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 World Cups, because they're going to go down to some of the best players this country and women's baseball has seen. So certainly not retiring them, certainly not putting them down. I'd like, as I said, Chinese Taipei, I thought 10, 15 years ago would be the country that would win another World Cup, and I haven't seen the development go. I know there's a new president in Chinese Taipei who's a woman, so who knows, that might make a difference. And there is a lot of great work going on with the Japanese Women's Baseball Federation and Taiwan, so hopefully the neighbouring countries can look, a rising tide lifts all boats, and if Japan could help everybody out, that would be great.
Lots on the line. Those are the 6 teams that are playing.
And again, there are some really good stories on this team beyond the veterans, because some of the older players that they have are actually newcomers, and there's a few of these, but one that caught my eye is Chin Young Chung, she's a flight attendant, worked for Starbucks, and has had to take unpaid leave to be able to play in this tournament. But she was only noticed at high school, like just was throwing a baseball around. And a coach noticed her, invited her to a tournament, and she actually joined the team at the 2019 Asian Cup, I believe it was, didn't play, and actually got injured in warm-ups and lost the ability to throw. And since that time has sort of undergone a lot of, obviously, intense rehab and those sorts of things, and has now become a national team pitcher. So she was only just noticed at high school about 7 or 8 years ago, was just throwing a ball randomly, and has kind of been in and around this program, and now is getting that opportunity to play. So as Amy mentioned before, there's so many stories at this tournament that are great that we want to tell. And at times you've got to look beyond the box score and try and tell the stories of the sacrifices that are made of some of these players to represent their country. And Chinese Taipei have a lot of those. So even though they do have a lot of veteran returning players, they've got some older players with some really good stories who are actually making their first World Cup appearance and representing their country for the first time.
I can't wait to hear some more of the stories on your calls whenever we do get to play ball. Maybe you're listening to this and we've already started. WBSC website is going to be your gospel, by the way, in terms of getting the schedule there, even in tournament formats, all the communications, the team on the ground. Those are the 6 teams. There's 3 spots on the board. Now, I hate as a commentator, and I hate it when people come to me and I'm calling the thing and I'm supposed to be a voice for it. People say, who's going through? Name your pick, because you always leave out some teams and it's their story. But I'm going to phrase it like this instead. From the outside looking in, and I get to be the outside, you get to be the inside. The favorites on paper, Japan, are number 1 because they have earned the right for the last 12 years to say that they're number 1. No one's going to dispute that. Then you would put on paper, you would say it's Venezuela and Chinese Taipei should be the other teams that get through. They're kind of the status quo anyways in terms of getting there. And then you have Cuba, Great Britain, and the Philippines. So I'm going to phrase it like this. Of the 3 teams that are not in the status quo to try to break things up, which team do you think has the highest ceiling to be able to potentially push through and get through that group?
So outside of Japan and Venezuela?
Outside of Japan, Venezuela, and Chinese Taipei, which of those 3 other teams, so you got Great Britain, you've got Cuba, and you've got Philippines, which of those 3 teams do you think has the highest ceiling? Not necessarily the one that might be firing here, but if everything was firing, just their sky seems to have a higher, limit than maybe the other teams.
Look, it's hard because I actually am on the fence between Cuba and Philippines, because I know the Philippines, the background they have is softball and they can be clean, but I know the explosiveness and the unpredictability of South American baseball, and the youth of Cuba, it's just unknown. It really is. I think to me, I actually want to flip the answer and say that the veteran presence of Chinese Taipei versus that youth of Cuba, who's going to win in that battle? That's my third place.
That's the big battle for you. But you could probably make a case for all three of those teams, right? Like Great Britain have a lot of those veteran players as well. They've got some experience, the success of winning in tournament baseball together, the expectation. Like you wouldn't be surprised if they crack through. Philippines are a bit of a wild card in this all, but they've been competitive at Asian championships, as you said. And Cuba have that youth factor. Any one of those three teams could potentially disrupt the status quo. It's not like some other WBSC tournaments that respectfully we've called, Rolsey, where it's like, oh, it's South Africa, Germany, and Australia. They're going to be fighting for the bottom three. They're not going to even get close to the top six. We've seen that before. This feels a lot different. Am I wrong in that read, Rolsey?
No, I don't think so at all. And I mean, there's unknowns with a few of these teams. I mean, we're sitting here saying that we think Great Britain are just happy to be here, but I mean, they've got two players that legitimately all-world type talent on them. They could be all-tournament type players. And, if you have a dominant arm and a dominant infielder that is a middle-of-the-order bat, who knows what happens, right? So I think I'll give you two games that I'm most excited to watch if and when we start playing baseball. As I look out my window, the visibility is now about 1.5 kilometers as opposed to 1 kilometer, what it was earlier. Obviously excited to see Japan, Venezuela. I hope we get it. I think Amy and I have made our points clear that we want to see, and I'm sure Cindy Anzola wants to see where Venezuela are, but we want to see where they are against that benchmark, right? We want to see where they are against the top nation in the world, and that's the ultimate matchup of this group, I think. But the other one for me is the Philippines versus Great Britain, because there's no doubt that whichever team wins that, there's going to be joy abound because you've won the first World Cup in your country's women's baseball history, right? And because there are so many interesting stories, and we're sitting here saying that, either of those teams are going to be happy to get their first World Cup win, but who's to say that those teams don't surprise and end up, if you, like we said, if they end up playing 3 games, you end up with 2 wins, stranger things can happen, and one of those two nations may end up being in the top 3. So those are the 2 games. Nothing against Chinese Taipei and Cuba. Obviously, we've talked a lot about them, and that youth versus age matchup is fun in and of itself. But those 2 matchups being Japan versus Venezuela and Philippines, Great Britain are the 2 that I'm most looking forward to. And I just pray that we get those matchups at some point in the next few days.
Yeah, 100% agree with those 2 games. And as we said, I think the third game for me is that Cuba Chinese Taipei, the veteran experience versus the youth. So I'm keen. But I think that 7th team, the weather, the schedule, the conditions and the change that we're going to see.
That 7th team has scored all the runs so far. It's the only team that scored any runs. That 7th team. They've been pretty dominant so far the first day and a half. Undefeated.
They I think that thrown in, like on paper before the tournament, we had all this ready to go. And now it's like, I think now we could see some things go either way. And I hope that doesn't mean someone costs a spot in the World Cup next year. But I think definitely every team has an opportunity to take a win here at any point. And I think that's exciting because we know how great Japan is for women's baseball. I don't think Japan winning an 8th title in a row is a good thing for women's baseball. We need more countries. We need more countries competing. And I think we're starting to see that change in world baseball at the moment. I really do think we're seeing that change. And I think back to when I was here 20 years ago as a player and where the game was 20 years ago. And that was the first time we saw Cuba. A few years later, the first time we saw Venezuela, and we start to see these new countries. I think from where the game was when I played my first World Cup 22 years ago, I think about where it could be in 22 years. And it's really exciting.
That's a great way to end the preview of this group. Hopefully we can touch base when we know what the formula is for teams to get through, or at least get a recap of what's going on. I can't wait to listen to both of you call the action. Great chat about women's baseball and the Women's World Cup. Really look forward to watching all of the action unfold in Tainan. Amy, thank you for joining us. We'll try to catch up with you a little later in the week. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully you enjoyed our little preview.